Greetings, welcome. In this lesson, we will continue our brick building. Now, of course, you have saved a peg start and you could import that into a new scene. I will go ahead and review building the peg start. You'll recall that we started with a polygonal cylinder and we chose 8 sections, and make sure that your y-axis is up. We'll hit create. We then came to the channel box, and on the scale Y, chose 0.4. That is the height of our peg. We'll jump into the orthographic side or front view, and we're going to put the pivot at the bottom of the shape and then place that on the ground plane. You'll recall that the D key allows us to reposition the pivot, and we slide that up on the Y just to activate the Y constraint. Then we'll hold down the V key for vertex snapping, and with our middle mouse button, snap to this vertex here, which puts it level with the bottom. And then we'll tap the D key a second time to get out of the reposition pivot mode. And now we can grid snap holding down the X key. We can grid snap that up 1 unit. We'll tap the spacebar, come back to the perspective view. I'll hit the F key so that we frame that. I'm going to come to the bottom and delete the bottom set of faces. Right click to face, and we'll use the Shift key to make a multiple selection. Out of good habit, we'll hit the 4 key to make sure that we haven't anything selected on the other side. And then we'll hit delete. Delete that bottom set of faces. Now we'll extrude that edge and we'll create our 4x4 square. We'll right click, choose edge, double click, come to the modeling toolkit, and we'll hit extrude, and we're driving out on the local Z, and we're going to drive out just to about 0.5, 0.6 before we jump into the orthographic top view. And you'll recall that we are creating a 4x4 square. We'll right click and choose vertex, and we'll choose one of those vertices, and you'll recall we want to see both red and blue so that we can freely snap in both the X and Z direction. And we don't want to drag because we may inadvertently constrain ourselves on one of those axis directions. So our best bet is to click in the middle, make sure that we've got blue and red available, Z and X. We'll hold down the X key, and with our middle mouse button, we'll click on the grid that we're snapping to. We're not going to drag. So X key, middle mouse button, X key, middle mouse button, X key, middle mouse button, and we can come and create the corners. X key, middle mouse button, X key, middle mouse button. And there we have it. We have our circular shape running into a rectangular, or in this case, a square shape. If we hit the 3 key, we'll see that that edge is soft. And so our final step is to bevel these edges here. We'll right click 12 o'clock edge, double click, shift double click. I'll hit the 4 key so that you can see that selection. And we'll come to the bevel tool in the modeling toolkit. Our fraction for the pegs is 0.2, and the segments are 2. Now we want to make sure that the pivot is at the bottom. We'll right click to the object mode, just jump into a side view and verify that the pivot is indeed at the bottom. If you look at your channel box, you see that you have a series of history information, so we'll delete all of our history. And now we are ready to export that peg. You've probably already done this, but just a good review, and if you want to do that again, perform that model procedure a few times to commit it to memory. That would be a good idea. At this point, if you hadn't already done so, you would come to Export Selection, and we would call this Peg Start. Peg Start. I am going to duplicate this and just set it aside on a layer. All right, now let's build our first brick. We're going to build a 1x1 brick. In the previous lesson, we built a 1x1 plate. The only difference in the workflow is the length. Our plates are 1.6 high and our bricks are 4.8 high. The workflow should be familiar to you, and this is a good review exercise for the process. We'll double click that outer edge. We'll come to the modeling toolkit and we'll hit extrude. And of course, this is our one variable between the two lessons is the local translate z. We'll say negative 4.8, and that is the total length of our brick without not counting the peg. We'll come to the bottom, and you'll recall that we want to fill this hole. We'll right click and choose edge, and we'll select that bottom edge, 4 key, you can see that selection there. And we'll come to mesh, fill hole, mesh, fill hole. If you were to hit the 3 key now, you see that you've got an n-gon, we've got an 8-sided edge, and we want to make sure that everything is 4-sided. So we'll come and we'll just connect these components. We can use the multi-cut tool. We'll click drag and hit return, and we'll click drag and hit return, and we've completed that one-by-one shape. We'll right-click object mode, and we want the pivot at the bottom. Before we export this as our one-by-one brick start, we'll place the pivot at the bottom. We'll tap the D key once again. We'll activate the Y constraint. We'll hold down the V key, and with our middle mouse button, snap to this bottom vertex, which places the pivot at the bottom center. We're still in the reposition pivot mode, so we'll tap the D a second time, and now we're free with the X key to grid snap that up onto the ground plane. This is where we want it before we export it. And once again, in the channel box, you can see that history information, so we'll come to edit, and we'll just go delete all by type history, or probably better, delete by type history with this selected. Delete by type history. And now we're ready for export. So we would come with this selected in object mode, file, export selection, one-by-one brick start, one-by-one brick start. I'll let you get to this point, and in the next part of the video, we'll bevel this, we'll create the recessed version, and we'll go through the process of building various sizes of bricks. Okay, be right back. Welcome back. Let's bevel the edges of our one-by-one brick. We'll right-click to edge and choose the top square. We'll shift double-click around the bottom 4 times to get those 8 edges. And then we will select the 4 corner edges. And we're ready to bevel. I'll hit the 4 key and dolly around so that you can see that. We'll come to the modeling toolkit and we'll hit bevel. You'll recall that the fraction for our edges is 0.1 and our segments are 2. We'll right click to object mode, and we'll hit the 5 key and we'll hit the 3 key, and you can see that smooth preview for our one-by-one brick beveled. You'll want to export that, right? We'll delete the history first for the object, edit, delete by type history. You want to make sure that the pivot is at the bottom and that it's sitting on the ground plane before you export. And we'll say File, Export Selection, one-by-one brick bevel, one-by-one brick bevel. Okay, let's continue on. Let's create a version. I'm going to put this on a layer and bring back my one-by-one brick start. You can import that into a new scene. So File, New Scene, and you'll be importing one-by-one brick start. In this case, we'll create the recess on the bottom. We'll select these 4 faces, and always a good idea to hit the 4 key just to make sure that you have a clean selection. We'll come to the modeling toolkit and we'll hit extrude, and our offset is 0.8, and we're going to extrude a second time, and our local translate z will be negative 4. So before we, when we were working on our plates, our offset was 0.8 and our local translate z was 0.8. But in this case, and if we hit the 4 key, we can see that. Let's jump into an orthographic view, hit the 4 key. Right here we have 0.8, and then because our total height was 4.8, if we go up 4, that leaves 0.8 here. Let me right click off of there. So we have 0.8 in this direction and then 0.8 top to bottom. And we achieved that because this length here is 4. All right, now we have to go through the process of selecting the edges. We'll double click that top edge, and we can just shift double click the bottom outer edge. We'll shift double click the bottom inner edge, and then we'll shift double click 4 times to get this interior recessed edge. Now we'll go through the process of the corner edges, 1, 2, 3, 4, holding down the shift key, of course. Our diagonals, shift click, 2, 3, and 4. And then our outer corner edges, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll hit the 4 key, and I'll dolly around, and you can see that clean selection. And was the case in our previous lesson, if you create the bevel and you've missed an edge or you have an unnecessary edge, simply undo, correct the selection, and rebevel. So we'll hit bevel here. Our fraction is 0.1. Our segments are 2. We'll right click to object mode. We'll hit the 5 key and the 3 key, and we'll dolly around. And I'm going to turn off my grid just so we can see that a little bit better. And we have quads all the way around. Nice 4 surface shape. So here we have a 1x1 brick recess. 1x1 brick recess. We want to delete the history. We want to ensure that the pivot is at the bottom, which it is. And now we can say File, Export Selection, File, Export Selection, 1x1 brick recess. All right, I'll let you get to this point, and the next section will build out our 1x2, 2x4, 2x4, and then I'll demonstrate how we can build via the duplicate special any length or width brick or plate. All right, be right back. Welcome back. We have, I've re-imported my 1x1 start. You can do the same. File, create new scene. File, import, 1x1 start. And let's create our 1x2. Let's jump into the top view, and we'll model Z forward, which means we'll slide this over 2 units on the positive X, and we'll come and duplicate this. You can hit Command D. I'll do it the long way. Edit, duplicate, and we'll grid snap this over. And we have the one on the left is sitting -2 units on the X, and this one on the right is sitting 2 units on the X. Now you'll recall that we have to delete the facing faces. So we'll come and right click, choose face. We'll select the 2 faces, probably better with the Q key. Hit the 4 key to make sure we don't have anything selected on the other side, and we'll hit delete. And then we'll come and we'll right click and do the same on this set of faces, 4 key, just to make sure. We'll hit delete, and now we can put this one back. We can grid snap back. Turn my grid back on so that I can grid snap. And we're back to 2 units on the X. Now we'll select both objects, and in the modeling toolkit, we'll combine. And then we want to merge these shared vertices. So you'll recall if I were to just pick a single vertex and move it, you can see that they're both occupying the same place, but they are not merged or welded. So we'll just draw a bounding box around everything. We have all the vertices selected, but only those that are within 0.01 proximity to each other will be welded. Just easier to draw a big bounding box. And we'll come to Edit Mesh, Merge. Edit Mesh, Merge. We have all of our vertices selected. Edit Mesh, Merge. And now if you were to click on a single vertex and slide it, you can see that it is indeed singular. There aren't 2 sitting in the same place. And so now we have our 1x2 brick. We'll delete our history, and we'll put our pivot at the bottom, right? So since this was a newly generated shape, the pivot occurs at the center. So we'll tap the D key, we'll activate the Y, we'll hold down the V key, middle mouse button, click to this vertex here, and now our pivot is exactly at the center. Exactly at the bottom. And because it was already on the ground plane, it is sitting on the ground plane. We'll tap the D key to get out of that, and we're now ready to export. File, export selection, and this would be 1:2 start. 1:2 start. I'll let you get to this point and then we'll create our beveled and recessed version of this piece. Be right back. Okay, let's bevel these edges and we'll use our latest technique. We'll select all of the edges, right click, choose edge, and draw bounding box. And if we check this in the perspective view, you can see that we have every single edge selected. And now we'll go through the process of deselecting the interior edges. And we'll do that in the top view, orthographic view, the front orthographic view, and the side orthographic view. So in the top, we're using the control key to create a deselection. So control key is deselecting all of the interior edges from that top view. Now we'll jump to the front view and control select all of the interior edges in this view. And finally on the side view, we'll hold down the control key, draw a bounding box. And if we come and look in the perspective view, we are left with just the corner edges. Just the corner edges. And now we can bevel. So in the first lesson where we were building the plates, we shift selected around just so that you could see which edges we were actually after. Now that you've practiced that and understand what the exterior corner edges are, I think this technique, especially as our bricks and plates grow, is a bit more efficient. So we'll employ this technique going forward, at least on the beveled versions. We'll still have to shift select when we create our recessed versions. But at least for these bricks, and these are very common, this process should be a little bit more efficient. All right, we'll come to bevel, and you'll recall our fraction is 0.1, and our segments are 2. Right click to object mode, hit the 5 key, hit the 3 key, and here is our 1:2 beveled. Not recessed, but 1:2 beveled. We'll put the pivot at the bottom, or make sure that it's at the bottom. It is, since this was an existing shape and we'd already done that, the pivot remains at the bottom. We'll delete our history, and now we are ready to export. File export 1:2 brick bevel. 1:2 brick bevel. All right, let me import mine. I'm going to set this away on a layer, and I'll import my 1:2 brick start. And let's create our interior recess. And we'll use our latest technique as well for making that selection. A little bit easier. We'll just select all of the faces, right? So that is all of the faces, including the faces on the bottom. And now if I hold down the control key and draw a bounding box around all of the faces except the bottom faces, right? So this bounding box is going across all of the faces. I'm holding down the control key, and it has deselected those, leaving us only with with the bottom faces. Now you could have held the shift key, but the more faces that we have, the more cumbersome that becomes to hold the shift key down to create that selection. So using the control key in this instance as well is a little bit more efficient than using the shift key. So we'll come to the modeling toolkit, we'll hit extrude, and you'll recall that our offset is 0.8, and we're going to extrude a second time, and our local Z is going to be -4, -4, and I'll just type that in. Right click to object mode, and we can verify that. Let's jump into the orthographic view, and you can see here we have this 0.8 value and 0.8. Because this 4, right, our total distance here is 4.8, so extruding that up for a value of 4 leaves 0.8 even all the way around. Now we have to manually select these edges. We can't use that bounding box technique. But good practice. We'll get these corner edges here. We'll come to the bottom, double click, and I'm just selecting all the edges as we go. We'll grab that corner edge, that corner edge. Let's hide the grid so we can see a little bit better. This edge and this edge, and we'll double click 4 times on this terminal rectangle. Shift double click and Shift double click. All right, we'll hit the 4 key, dolly around, and you can see that edge selection. Once again, if you missed an edge or you selected an incorrect edge, you'll be able to see that after you bevel, and you would simply undo and correct the selection. Our fraction is 0.1 and our segments are 2. We'll right click to object mode, hit the 5 key, hit the 3 key, and we can see our 1x2 brick recess. 1x2 brick recess. And yeah, that's a good selection. You can go back and forth between 1 and 3 just to make sure you've got all the proper edges beveled there. Okay, in the next section, we'll create our 2x2 and then our 2x4. And in the final bit, I'll show you how we can create, using a slightly varied technique, to create longer versions of the bricks. Okay, be right back. Let's create our 2x2. We will, of course, begin with our 1x2 start. So File, New Scene, File, Import, 1x2 start. We'll jump into the top view, and I'm just going to slide this 2 units in the positive Z direction. You can see in the channel box, that would be translate Z2. And then we will duplicate, edit, duplicate. With my grid on, I can grid snap 2 units, or 4 units total, but it's translate Z -2. And so we have our 2 1x2s sitting next to each other, and we'll delete the facing faces. So we'll right click and choose the 4 faces here. 4 key to make sure you've got a clean selection. We'll hit delete. And we'll do the same on the other side, or on the other shape, I should say. Selecting those 4 key, delete. And now we can set that back to -2. Right, and just to verify, right, we deleted these faces, deleted these faces. Now we can select both meshes in object mode. We'll come to the modeling toolkit, we'll hit combine. You know by now that we've got 2 vertices sitting in the same place, so we'll draw a bounding box around all of them, and only those within 0.01 proximity to each other will be merged. We'll come to Edit Mesh, Merge, and we can verify that. We'll click on that same vertex, and now when we slide it, we see that the 2 have become 1. This is our 2x2 brick start, 2x2 brick start. I'm just going to duplicate that and hide one away. And we'll continue by beveling the edges. Beveling the edges. So make sure that you've exported. And right, we want to make sure the pivot is at the bottom. So we'll put that pivot at the bottom, activate the Y, hold down the V key, middle mouse button, tap the D key a second time. Delete the history, right? We'll delete all of our history, and then File, Export Selection. This is our 2x2 brick start. 2x2 brick start. All right, and we can use our latest technique for selecting the exterior edges, and we begin this process by selecting all of the edges initially. So just a big bounding box selection around everything. And in each of the orthographic views, we'll create a control bounding box deselection. So take note, I'm selecting all of the edges within the square, or within this cube, right? But not the exterior edges. So that was in the top view. We'll jump into the front view and do the same. Control deselect, bounding box. Jump into the side view, Control deselect, bounding box. And we can verify this in the perspective view, right? We've got a clean corner edge selection all the way around. We can come to the modeling toolkit, hit bevel. Our fraction is 0.1, our segments are 2, and right, our pivot is at the bottom. Just verify that. We want to delete our history, and we'll say File, Export Selection, and this is our 2x2 bevel. I'm going to go ahead and hide that away, and we'll bring back our 2x2 start, you would say File New Scene and import it, or if you're managing your layers as I am here. But we want to create our recessed version. So we'll come to the bottom, and we can use a similar technique. We'll select all of the faces, right? So we have all of our faces selected, and then in the orthographic front or side view, we'll hold down the Control key, and let's take a look here. We'll hold down the Control key to make a negative selection, so that deselected all of those faces and left us with the bottom, right? So that's just a little bit more efficient than holding the Shift key and going all the way around. Just to review, we selected all of the faces, held down the Control key, drew that bounding box, and we're now left with the faces we wanted to select. We'll come to the modeling toolkit, and we're extruding twice. We'll hit extrude, and our offset is negative 0.8 on the offset. And now we'll extrude a second time, and this is -4. I'll go ahead and type that in. And you want to just take a look in the orthographic side view and make sure. So we've got 0.8 and 0.8 there. So here is our recessed, and of course we want to bevel that. And we need to bevel, right? Because if we hit the 3 key, we can see that those edges aren't sharp. Now, unfortunately, we have to go through the process of selecting around. We don't have, and let me just mention that, we don't have the ability to deselect the interior edges because that recess is part of that interior. So we have to revert back to our manual selection. And in this case, let's just go through. Last time I selected all of the squares and rectangles first, then we got the outer edges. This time, let's just go down through the selection. So I got that top square. Corner edges, we'll shift double click that bottom square. We'll grab these 4, shift double click that square, shift 2, shift 3, shift 4, and then we have to shift 4 times on the final square. So it didn't take too terribly long if you're getting the hang of it. And we can dolly around. And once again, if you miss an edge or you have an incorrect edge selection after you bevel, simply undo and re-execute it. We'll hit bevel. Our fraction is 0.1. Our segments are 2. We'll right click, hit the 5 key, hit the 3 key, and we'll dolly around, check that interior, and that looks good. So our 2x2 brick recess. Our pivot needs to be set to the bottom, right? Because this is a new shape, so the pivot was set to the center. Tap the D key, activate the Y, V key, middle mouse button, tap the D key to get out of that. Pivot's at the bottom. We'll delete our history, and now we're ready to say File, Export, Selection, 2x2 brick recess, 2x2 brick recess. All right, in the next section, we'll complete our final brick using this technique, and then we'll talk about using duplicate special to create various widths beyond that size. All right, be right back. Welcome back. Let's create our final 2x4 brick using this technique. We've got our 2x2 start, right? File, new scene, file, import. Import your 2x2 start. We'll grid snap this forward 4 units. We'll create a duplicate, edit, duplicate, and we'll grid snap this back 4 units. That's what it will look like. And then we're going to delete these faces. So we'll pick 1, 2, 3, 4. Hit the 4 key to make sure you've got a clean selection. We do. We'll hit delete. We'll come and do the other side. 4 key, clean selection, hit the delete key, right click, and we'll set that back to 4. So right, we've got these 2x2 starts facing each other with their shared faces having been deleted. Just verifying that there for you. We'll have both selected in object mode. Come to the modeling toolkit, hit combine. We know that these vertices are not welded, so we'll draw a big bounding box, edit mesh, merge, and we can verify now that they have been welded or merged together. This is now a singular shape, and we'll export this as our 2x4 start. 2x4 start. You want the pivot at the bottom though, right? Because that was a new shape, the pivot was set to the middle. Activated the Y, V key, tap the D key, and now we've got that pivot at the bottom. We'll delete the history, and now we're ready to export. File, export selection 2x4. I'm simply going to duplicate it and set it on a layer and hide it away. All right, so we've got our latest technique where we'll select all of the edges, use our control key to deselect the central edges, and we'll do that in each of the 3 orthographic views. So you can see that it's a relatively quick way of selecting those external edges, and we can come to the modeling toolkit and we can hit bevel, and we know that our fraction is 0.1, and our segments are 2. And so here is our hit 3 key just to verify that. You want to dolly around our 2x4, and this is probably the most common brick that you'll use, right? The 2x4 simply beveled. This can sit on top of a stack, and as long as you're not seeing the bottom, this is your most common, typically your most common used brick. All right, so we would say File, Export Selection, 2x4 bevel. I'm going to hide that one and bring back my, bring back my 2x4 start, and we'll create the recessed version. Now we can select all of the faces, right? We'll draw a big bounding box around all of the faces. We only want the bottom, so we'll now use the control key to deselect all the top faces. That leaves us with the bottom set of faces. And we can come to the modeling toolkit and we'll hit extrude twice. The first time we'll create the offset of 0.8, right? Offset of 0.8, and then we'll extrude the second time, and our local Z translate is -4. We'll right click to object mode, and we'll take a look at this just in the side view, and you can see that nice 0.8 and 0.8 uniform. Now we have to go through this rather lengthy process of selecting the edges all the way around. We can't use our shortcut process because the interior on the bottom is in the same spot. But if you know what you're selecting, it doesn't take that long, and we'll just do it in order here. We're at the diagonals using the shift key. Shift key will get the bottom interior, we'll get the 4 interior corners, and then we'll shift double click 4 times to get the terminal rectangle. So not too terribly long, right? That probably took maybe 15 seconds to make that selection. Once you get the hang of it, it goes relatively quickly. We'll come to the modeling toolkit, we'll hit bevel. Our fraction is 0.1 and our segments are 2. We'll right click to object, hit the 5, hit the 3, dolly around. You really want to check the bottom, make sure you've got a clean selection. If you didn't have a clean selection, you could simply undo, deselect what was incorrectly selected, or shift select what you had failed to select, and then re-execute the bevel. We want to make sure the pivot is at the bottom, and it is. We want to delete our history, delete by type history with this in object mode, and we'll say File, Export Selection, 2x4 brick recess, 2x4 brick recess. All right, we'll be back, wrap up the video. I'll show you a new technique for creating particularly lengthy bricks or plates. Be right back. Greetings, welcome back. Let's use an alternative method, and this is useful for lengthy bricks or plates or odd length bricks or plates. We are back to our 1x2 start, and we're going to duplicate, edit, duplicate, and I'm going to slide this in the negative x direction, the negative z direction. And you're familiar with this process. If we were building a 2x4, as we already have, we would delete these interior faces, or the facing faces. In this case, let's create a hollowed version, a see-through version. So we're going to delete the faces on both sides. We'll hit delete. So now we have a see-through version. And as long as this is sitting out here, let's go ahead and delete these faces, 4 key, to make sure you've got a clean selection. We'll hit delete, and we'll set this back, holding the grid X key to grid snap that. If we take a look there, we've got those two pieces. This one is completely hollow, and then this has the faces that are facing deleted. And now we can use duplicate special to make any length. We can duplicate this to be any length. We'll come and open the duplicate special dialog box, edit, duplicate special dialog box, and we're going in the negative z direction, so positive z, and if we're going in this direction, this would be negative z. So I'm going to say -4, so these are 4 units. So every new duplicate will be 4 units. They'll fit together precisely. And let's say we want 5 additional. So we'll say 5 additional plus the 6, 7, and we'll duplicate another end cap. And this will give us a 2x8. So I'll hit duplicate special. Just a quick review. Here is translate z -4, number of copies 5, and we hit duplicate special, and those are progressively duplicated down the line. Now we have this open piece here, and so let's just duplicate our original, that has this these end faces already deleted. So we'll duplicate this, edit, duplicate, and let's slide it down the line in the top view. So we've got a new duplicate. We'll just grid snap this down here, and then we have to turn it around. The deleted set of faces are on the wrong side. So we need to rotate this 180 on the Y. You can do it interactively. Hold down the J key with the rotate tool active. We're rotating around in 15 unit increments. We can look in the channel box. That was -180. -180 on the Y. So just a quick review of what we're looking at. We've got this end cap version, we've got the original end cap version, and then we have these series of duplicates progressively duplicated in place, all -4 units, in this case in the negative Z. And now we're back in business. You're familiar with the process by now. We'll come and we'll hit combine. Now we have a whole series of vertices sitting in the same place but not welded, so we'll draw a big bounding box, edit mesh, merge. And here is a 2x8 start. Now, before we were to export this, as we did with all the others, we want to make sure the pivot is at the bottom. So we'll tap the D key, we'll slide that up, make that active. V key, middle mouse button, gets us to the bottom. D key once more. We'll delete all of our history, delete by type history, and now we could export this. File, export. I'm just going to make a duplicate and put it on a layer and hide it away. And just a quick review, you know the process by now, but let's just finish our thought here. We'll select all the edges. We're using our latest technique. We'll hold down the Control key and draw a bounding box selection on the interior edges. So you can see we're left with that exterior edge. That's the top view. Do the same in the front view. Control key, bounding box select. And we'll do Control key, bounding box select on the side view. So we've got all of those exterior edges, and we're in business, and we're ready to now hit bevel, our fraction 0.1, our segments 2 and object, 5 key, 3 key, dolly around, and here we have a 2x8 bevel, a 2x2 brick bevel ready for export. All right, in the next section, we'll repeat this process with building a plate. The plates are typically the very large sized versions. So we'll wrap this video up using the technique we just employed, but we'll do it with a plate. Be right back. Welcome back. Let's use a variation of the last technique that we just learned to create a large plate. Let's say, for instance, an 8x8. We'll begin with the process that is familiar to you. I've got Z forward, and we'll make a duplicate, and we'll slide it out. I'll hit the F key, and we'll just make it a hollow see-through, right? Selecting those, we can hit the 4 key, and we'll hit delete. And so we've got that piece that we can see through. We know we need to delete these facing faces, and we'll execute that. So we've got an end cap here, blank set of faces, and then a see-through. We'll grid snap this back into place, right, just to verify we're going in the negative Z direction. And so we've left the initial end cap just at the origin. So this is 4 units down from that. We'll open the duplicate dialog box, edit duplicate special dialog box, and I'm going to reset that just so we can re-input the numbers. We're right here is Z forward, we can see that there, and so we're going to duplicate in the negative Z direction, and these are 4 unit shapes, so we'll set them down 4 grid units, 4 units. We're going to imagine that we want this to be 8, so we need 5 additional because we have 1 here and then our 2 end caps. So 5, 6, 7, the other end cap would give us a total of 8. All right, negative 4 on the Z, 5 number of copies, and we'll hit duplicate. And we get those all in a row. Of course, that's open, so we'll duplicate this end cap and we'll rotate it 180 on the Y. We'll hit duplicate, just regular old duplicate. We'll jump into the top view, and we've got that duplicate, and we'll grid snap it down here. Now it's facing the wrong direction, right? So we'll, if you're doing it interactively, you can just select your rotate tool, hold down the J key, and rotate that around, or you could have typed negative 180 in the rotate Y. So we've got, right, just a quick review, we've got an end cap here, it's blank on that side. We've got an end cap here, it's blank on that side. And then we have 6 completely view-through versions of that. And you know the drill by now. We'll select all of them. We'll come to the modeling toolkit. We'll hit combine. And of course, you know all those vertices that are overlapping need to be merged. So we'll right-click, select all the vertices, come to Edit Mesh, Merge. And here we have a 1x8 plate. Now, if you were going to export this, you should export this. We want to put the pivot at the bottom, tap the D key, slide that up, V key, middle mouse button, tap the D key, and with it in object mode, we'll delete all the history. And we could call this 1x8 plate start, 1x8 plate start. And you could bevel the edges using the techniques, and if you needed to create that interior recess, that process is familiar to you by now. But let's use the technique that we just developed to create an 8x8 rather than a 1x8. So we'll duplicate this and we'll slide it out. Now I want to select all these faces in order to delete them. If I jump into the orthographic view, the fact that I also have this piece may be visually confusing. So let's just set this on a layer and we'll hide that away. So in the channel box, my layers are active. I have that original 1x8 selected, and I'll create a layer and then I'll just hide that layer away. So currently I've got the original 1x8 for me is sitting on layer 2, and I've got that hidden away. Now we're free to jump into the orthographic side view and choose faces, and we'll draw a bounding box within that selection right? We don't have the end caps selected. And let's just review, right? That bounding box selection got all the faces on either side. And we can hit delete. Now let's set this one on a layer. We'll set this on a layer and hide it. Bring back the original, and we'll delete these faces. Now, you could right-click and choose the face and shift select around, but we're getting the hang of using Control key. So we'll select them all, and then in the top view, right, we'll hold down the Control key and just make sure you're on the right side. So we're going to be duplicating in this direction. So we'll hold down the Control key and we'll deselect all of these faces. Deselect all of these faces on the positive X side, right? And we can see, and we'll just bring that back. You can see that that's where we'll be making the attachment. So we have all these faces selected, and we'll hit delete. And so now we're back in business. The same exact idea. We can grid snap this back into place, and we can make our series of duplicates. So this is the negative X direction, and we'll do the same thing. We'll open the duplicate special dialog box. And whenever there's values in here, it's just a good idea to start from scratch. So we'll come to Edit, Reset Settings. And this is the negative X direction. So before we went on the negative Z direction out here, now we'll go on the negative X direction 4. And we're making an 8x8, so we need 5 duplicates. This one plus 5 plus the 2 end caps will give us 8. So we'll hit 5. We'll hit duplicate. Got those all the way out, right? It's hollow all the way through. We'll come back to our original, which has the end cap. We'll duplicate it. We'll grid snap it out, right? And now it's facing the wrong direction, obviously. So we'll rotate it 180 or a negative 180 on the Y, or I'll do it interactively holding the J key. Rotated that around negative 180 on the Y. And here we have an 8x8 plate. And of course we need to select it all. Come to the modeling toolkit, hit combine, and you know the drill. We'll select all the vertices and we'll come to edit mesh merge. And you could save this one out. 8x8 plate start. And let's go ahead and bevel this. For us to use this one, it would need to be beveled. And for these ground plates, you're typically not seeing the bottom. So it would be common just to use this 8x8 with a bevel. And we'll use our technique where we select all of the edges. And this may be a little difficult to see. It's a great big reverse or negative selection. Holding the Control key, drawing that bounding box within, not selecting the exteriors, and then we have to do the same in the front view, right? Holding the Control key to deselect, not getting the outer edges, and the same in the side view. So we are left just with that top square, bottom square, and the corner edges, right? And then we'll come to the modeling toolkit. We'll hit bevel. Our fraction is 0.1. Our segments are 2. And now we could certainly export this 8x8 plate beveled. Hit the 3 key just to review that. I'll turn off my wireframe, and we can see we have a nice 8x8 plate that we can build something on. Okay. Very good. Technical questions in the discussion forum. Talk to you soon.